There was a small chest hidden in my family's attic, and inside it, a diary. Its pages were stained, and every word seemed written for me, as if the author had known I would find it centuries later. She was the mistress of a priest, a witch, and condemned to the flames. But between confessions and curses, she left something that still feels alive. And now, I don't know if I am the reader or the next victim. The stairs to the attic creaked, a dry sound, repeated, as if someone was climbing with me. But I was alone. The air up there was different, colder, heavier. So heavy it felt as though it was pushing me back. The attic was drowned in shadow, cut only by a thin ray of light slipping through a broken tile. Dust floated in that beam like tiny ashes, and for a moment I had the impression they were ashes from something burned long ago. I walked slowly, avoiding furniture hidden under sheets. Each step raised the smell of old wood mixed with iron, not rust, more like dried blood. And then I saw it, a small chest, iron, hidden in the darkest corner behind a fallen wardrobe. It didn't seem forgotten. It seemed to be waiting for me. I knelt down, ran my hand over the cold lid. The lock was corroded, but still firm. I forced it open. The snap echoed like a sigh held for centuries. Inside, I found dark fabrics, a broken rosary, and a leather-bound notebook, worn, cracked, yet warm to the touch. When I opened it, a sweet smell escaped, mixed with something metallic, something I knew, but didn't want to remember. On the first page, strong slanted letters. The message seemed to speak to me. If you are reading this, it means not even the fire could silence my voice. The ancient ink seemed to pulse on the page. When I read the first line, the smell of parchment disappeared, and suddenly, I was no longer in the attic. I was there, in her tavern.
The sound of the tavern was a living weight. Tankards slamming, rough laughter, heavy footsteps on worn wooden floors. The air was thick with the smell of cheap wine, roasted meat, and the smoke of candles. Behind the counter, I watched everything. Every customer. Every glance that lingered longer than it should. Men of the sea, tired women, travelers who carried dust and secrets in their boots. Then the door opened, not as if someone had simply walked in, but as if the air itself had been cut. Father Alvaro, black cassock, steady eyes, and that calm only predators have. He didn't look at the others, he came straight to me. "Good evening, Isabel," he said, as if he had always known me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He knew. He knew about the candles hidden behind the counter. He knew about the herbs drying in the attic. He knew the names I whispered at night when no one could hear. And still, he smiled. In that smile there were two things: protection and danger. He returned the next night, and the next, and the one after that. Always at night, always alone, always with something to ask of me. At first, the requests were small. A candle lit at the right time. A handful of herbs burned before the altar. Words whispered into the wine of an enemy. But soon, I realized I was opening doors for him and closing them for everyone else. With my help, he reached everything he wanted. He secured positions, won favors, removed people from his path, sometimes so quietly that no one dared to speak of what had happened. And at the end of the night, he came back to me, not as a priest, but as a man. I was his lover, his confidant, the only one who knew the full extent of his ambition. In the eyes of the village, he was the holy man who guided souls. In the dark, we were partners in the manipulation of destinies. And for a time, this game seduced me as much as he did. It was on a summer morning that he walked into the tavern. Matteo. The sun clung to his light brown hair, and the dust of the road still covered his boots. His eyes were calm yet curious, and his smile was the kind that could not be bought with coins or promises. He asked for bread and water, nothing more, but he stayed. I offered him work, cleaning tables, carrying barrels. He accepted, thanking me as if I had given him far more than a job. Matteo was different. He did not laugh loudly like the other men. He did not look at me with malice, but with respect. A kind of respect I no longer recognized in the world. Beside him, my body needed no defenses. And for the first time in a long while, I realized I was smiling without planning what would come next. But that light, that purity, had a price. Because in the world Alvaro and I had built, innocence was never a virtue. It was a weakness. And weaknesses are meant to be exploited. Alvaro noticed before I even admitted it to myself. His gaze dissected me, searching for what had changed, and it had changed. I still desired him, but I no longer lived waiting for his shadow at my door. Now, there was another presence in my thoughts, another voice I longed to hear at dawn. Matteo. At first, Alvaro pretended not to see it, but I saw it. Saw how his eyes followed Matteo across the tavern, how he watched him pour wine or carry barrels as if each movement were a personal offense. And then I noticed something worse. It wasn't only suspicion, it wasn't only jealousy. There was curiosity. The same curiosity I had seen in him the day he met me, but now it was aimed at the boy. The air between us began to change. Matteo smiled at me. Alvaro smiled at him. And I knew this triangle could not exist for long. One of us would end up burned, and in my world that word was never just a metaphor. Matteo settled into the tavern as if he had always belonged there. At first, it was only work. Carrying barrels, wiping tables, serving wine. But there was something in the way he looked at me, something without malice, only attention. Sometimes, as we washed cups side by side, our arms would brush by accident. And in those moments, it was as if the noise of the entire tavern faded into the distance. He listened to me, not like a client eager to steal secrets, but like someone who kept every word. He told me about his life on the road, about the family he had lost, about cold nights and days of hunger. And I, against every instinct, began to tell him about myself. Not everything, but enough to feel as though I was undressing without removing a single piece of clothing. One night, after everyone had gone, he stayed to help me close. The candlelight reached only our faces. His fingers touched my hand, hesitant. I did not pull away. It was then I realized what I felt for Matteo had nothing to do with power or control. It was something that weakened me and strengthened me all at once. And that, I knew, would be dangerous. Alvaro noticed. He always notices. He began to appear at the tavern at improbable hours. Sometimes he sat alone, watching Matteo as if assessing something rare, and dangerous. It wasn't only vigilance. There was interest. He would call Matteo aside for quick conversations, his voice too low for me to hear. Matteo always returned with a closed expression, but never seemed to have the courage to tell me what had been said. When I asked, he looked away, or gave me a brief smile and changed the subject. And there were the glances, too long. From Alvaro to him, from him to Alvaro, as if there were a silent conversation happening right in front of me, in a language I couldn't understand. With me, Alvaro was sharp. He spoke softly, but every word came poisoned. He's too young to understand who you are. Do you think he would stay if you knew everything? Be careful, Isabel. Sometimes innocence is just another kind of mask. He said this while looking into my eyes, and then turned back to watch Matteo. It was as if he wanted to break me inside before ever touching me. I began to wonder if Alvaro's interest was only to hurt me, or if he wanted Matteo for himself. And if it were true, how long would Matteo resist? The air in the tavern became suffocating, and I knew it would not be long before the game stopped being only words. The night felt wrong. Too quiet for a living village. No footsteps. No voices. When the tavern door opened, I didn't feel the cold from outside. I felt his presence. Alvaro entered alone, no cassock, just a dark cloak over his shoulders, and that look, without promise, only sentence. Do you think you can steal from me, Isabel? His voice low, each word a cut. I stole nothing, I began, but he interrupted. Matteo was never yours. He crossed the room like a shadow. A coarse cloth covered my face. His strength wasn't to hurt me, but to subdue me, to show he still decided my fate. When the cloth came off, the smell of mold and cold earth surrounded me, the tavern's cellar, my own cellar. The damp stone walls reflected the dim light of a single oil lamp. Chains hung from iron rings in the floor. And in the corner, a table with instruments that should never have been in a priest's hands. I spent days there, maybe weeks, with barely enough food, no bath, no rest. My body ached as if every bone carried the weight of the world. My skin burned with marks and cuts. My hair stuck to the sweat and dirt. The smell was of something no longer alive. He came only to speak of Matteo, always Matteo. He looked at me too, Isabel. You could never understand him like I do. I don't share what is mine. Between those words came the rough touches, the bindings, the cold iron against my skin. I was no longer the same, but something in me refused to die. One night, as he climbed the stairs, I let a piece of charcoal fall from what he used to mark barrels. I kept it, and with it I began to write. Not in a notebook, but on scraps of cloth, bits of wood, anything that could hold my words. I hid them in the cracks of the wall, between loose stones and floorboards. Not to save myself, but so that one day someone would know. Until, one day, he simply didn't come back. In his place came the men of the Inquisition, and as they dragged me out, I understood. Alvaro had only kept me there to deliver me already broken. The prison smelled of smoke and fear. The walls were so close, I could feel my own breath bouncing back at me. They chained me to a beam in the center of the room, as if my body alone could infect the air. The guards whispered when they passed, some making the sign of the cross, others staring as if curious about the witch they had caught. Days blurred into one another, marked only by the sound of keys and the taste of stale bread. I could still feel the cellar on my skin, the echoes of Alvaro's voice, the weight of his hands. And yet, I thought of Mateo. His face, the last true light I had seen before the darkness swallowed me. One night, I heard a shuffle outside my cell. The guard had fallen asleep, the keys hanging loosely from his belt. And in the shadow by the door, Mateo appeared. His eyes were wide, with fear, with grief. He didn't dare speak my name, but when his hand touched mine through the bars, I felt the warmth I thought I'd never know again. "I found them," he whispered. My words. The scraps of cloth. He had gone into the cellar after they took me, retrieving each hidden piece. "I will not let them burn you, and burn your truth," he said. He slipped a folded scrap of linen into my hand. "Finish what you started." That night, under the watch of the rats and the distant sound of chains, I wrote the last of my words in the trembling light of a torch, words that Mateo would keep. The trial was a spectacle. They read accusations I'd never heard before, twisting every act of kindness, every secret whispered in the dark, into proof of damnation. Alvaro sat in the front, his cassock once again spotless, his eyes fixed on me with neither triumph nor pity, only hunger, but not for me anymore, for the boy who had once been mine and perhaps his. The sentence was read at dawn, death by fire. My hands did not tremble. My eyes searched for Mateo in the crowd. I didn't find him, but I knew he had already carried my voice away from that place. The square was already full when they brought me out. The air carried the scent of burning wood, and under it, the metallic taste of fear. I felt no shame in keeping my head high. If they wanted a witch, I would give them the image of one, unbroken. Alvaro stood near the platform, the light of the torches painting his face in gold and shadow. For a moment, our eyes met. He raised his chin slightly, almost like a silent farewell or a victory. I refused to look away. They tied my wrists with rough rope, pressing me against the stake. The priest, not Alvaro, another, began reciting prayers loud enough to drown the murmurs of the crowd. But I barely heard him. I was listening for Mateo. I imagined him far from here, perhaps in the tavern, the chest closed, my words hidden inside. I imagined him alive, free, carrying me with him, even if my body would remain in ashes. When the fire caught, the first wave of heat was like a wall, stealing the air from my lungs. Smoke curled around my face, stinging my eyes. I closed them, not in surrender, but to see him more clearly in my mind. In that instant, I understood something. Alvaro might have taken my body, my freedom, even my life. But he could not take the truth I had placed in Mateo's hands. My last breath left my lips not in a scream, but in a whisper only I could hear. "Remember me." And then, The world became nothing but flame.
I was not in the square that morning. I could not watch them burn her. I stayed in the tavern, the shutters closed, the fire in the hearth cold. But I heard the bells, and I knew. I had the scraps of linen she had given me, each marked with her trembling hand, each smelling faintly of smoke and her perfume. For days after, I could not touch them without feeling the weight of what they meant. When the nights grew too long, I began to copy her words onto paper. I wrote slowly, as if each letter could bring her voice back into the room. Sometimes I imagined her at the table across from me, watching, correcting me when my pen faltered. The more I wrote, the more I understood her life, the parts she never told me, the secrets she carried like a blade against her own skin. I did not change a single word. This was hers, not mine to alter. When the last scrap was copied, I bound the pages in leather and hid them beneath the floorboards of the tavern, not because I feared the Inquisition, but because I feared forgetting. Years passed, customers came and went. Alvaro's name faded from the streets, but in my mind he remained, a shadow on the edge of every memory of her. And sometimes, late at night, when the tavern was empty and the fire low, I would take out the book and read her words until I could almost hear her laugh again.
The diary was never meant to be found. Hidden beneath the tavern floor for decades, it waited, silent, patient, as generations passed above it. Time devoured the names, faces of those who had once walked these streets. The cobblestones no longer echoed with Isabel's footsteps, and Alvaro's shadow had long since dissolved into dust. But the words endured. They held the taste of smoke, the scent of tavern wine, the weight of whispered sins traded in the dark. They told of a woman who had lived dangerously close to the fire, and of the men who burned for her in very different ways. And in those pages, whether written by her hand or copied by Mateo's, her voice never faltered. Even in the retelling, she refused to be erased. Perhaps that is why the diary feels alive, even now, as if each time it is opened, she returns. Perhaps the true curse was never the trial, the betrayals, or the fire. Perhaps it was survival, the kind that leaves no one truly alive. For every page of that diary breathes with longing, with hunger, with the ache of things left undone. And it asks, without mercy, the question no one dares to answer. What would you give to be remembered?